You're listening to the Ballet Piano Podcast, lifting the lid on dance accompaniment.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to this episode of the Ballet Piano Podcast. It's not Chris on the mic first today, it's me.
Matt stepped up.
Yeah, I am hosting this very important in conversation. But first, around the table with me is Chris Hobson.
Hello, listeners.
Akiko Hobson.
Hi.
And our very special guest, Maven Koo.
Hi guys, hello.
Thank you so much. Oh,
Can I please say something?
Applause.
Can I start with something?
Yeah.
To all your followers and potential other followers that might listen to this. Like, I've been working for over 30 years. This is the first time, followers, where I have personally requested to come on to something.
Oh,
So this is quite special.
it's very special for us as well.
Very honoured.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. Because trying to arrange this,
I'm sorry.
listeners and viewers, Maven is very busy. And, we were messaging your assistant and she said,
Yeah.
I've got 3 dates that Maven is available for, or see you in 2025, basically.
I'm sorry.
So at the time of recording, we're in the evening. But Maven, thank you so much
My
for coming
pleasure.
you.
on.
My absolute pleasure.
So what's happening at the moment for you, seeing as you're very busy?
Yeah. So as you know, I work very closely with Akram Khan.
Yeah.
And we are in rehearsal for a potential new creation that will happen next year. I also am working on getting myself really into shape. I mean, I'm always in shape, but Akram is making a new production which I'm dancing in
Whoa.
this
Wow.
year. So
Is that an exclusive?
kind of. We made a kind of announcement last week, but the proper announcement's coming tomorrow.
I mean, you being in it, is that an exclusive for us?
It is for you.
Oh,
Yeah,
fantastic.
absolutely. Yeah, it is for you.
That's that 2025, do you think that's going to happen?
No, it's happening this autumn.
Oh, I see.
It comes to Sattlers. That's
brilliant.
definitely an exclusive,
wow.
but it will
Yeah.
come out later. So it comes to London in November. And aside from that, I've got all the other work, which is staging and teaching class.
You are
et cetera, et cetera.
insanely busy. You have
Yeah,
so many different things that you do.
I do. I mean, I'm very lucky because I really my work really spans across different kind of worlds, if you
Yeah.
like. So, I work a lot, obviously, in the contemporary dance world, in the classical ballet world, in the Indian classical world.
Yes.
And also, I've got quite a lot of, I've always kind of had my hand within a kind of creative culture of the queer scene in London.
Yeah.
That's been a big part of my journey as well. Yeah.
Can you remember where it all started, taking you
How
right
did it
back to the
start for
beginning?
you?
I'm always fascinated how people get into dance, having been one myself.
Yeah.
How people's first foray into dancing.
It's interesting. Can you actually remember why you started dancing?
Yeah,
You can.
yeah.
I can't actually.
Wow.
Matt, why
Well,
did
because
you...
I started later.
Right. Okay.
I didn't do ballet at 3 like everybody else does.
Right. Okay.
So I can remember it because I was only 15.
Okay. Oh, you were 15.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was 5 when I started.
Yeah.
And what's
Wow.
interesting is I can't remember why I wanted to dance. I know that I needed to move, and my mom always says that I was just breaking everything at home.
Yeah.
But what's really amazing that I share quite often is, as a 5-year-old, I can still remember exactly the day and the time. So it's a Tuesday evening
Yeah.
at 6 p.m. In a studio that was in the basement of the dance school.
Yeah.
And my teacher was wearing a green sari. And I remember as a 5-year-old walking into the class and knowing immediately that it was something I was going to do my whole life.
And so did you start in Indian classical dance?
I did because there are many factors to that. My mom is Sri Lankan, Tamil.
Yeah.
My father is Chinese. I grew up very much within the context of Indian culture
Yeah,
in that
yeah,
sense.
yeah.
And also in Malaysia, interestingly, when I was growing up, Malaysia is an amalgamation of Indians, Chinese, and Malays.
Yeah.
The Indian community was the one that was probably the most vibrant in terms of just cultural education, in terms of dance classes,
Yeah.
music classes, etc. So it seemed a natural route based on my family upbringing and what was available. So I started ballet only when I was maybe 11 or 12.
Right.
Yeah.
Was there lots of boys? Because, ballet here, like in olden days, there are hardly any boys.
Yeah, no, I was the only boy. I remember doing all my exams. And, in reflection, you kind of think, I must have got these good grades just because I was the only boy.
That's not dissimilar to what David says, is it? I think David
Yeah.
was the only boy in his local school until he started training professionally.
Yeah.
And you know what's fascinating, Chris? Actually, it's so interesting how much all of it has eventually an impact in terms of your artistic identity. Because being the only boy for so long who did ballet, and all my idols growing up were women.
Yeah.
So I was in love with Kelsey Kirkland
Yeah.
and Cynthia Harvey and Natalia Makarova was like a massive idol. And this concept of like male dancing never hit me at all,
Wow.
ever, which was very beautiful because as a child I could really experience dancing because I loved to dance, not having to prove myself, from a gender perspective.
Yeah.
And it's the thing I struggled the most when I eventually came to the West and actually went into ballet training. And having a boys' class was quite traumatic, actually, for me.
So growing up, you only sort of had female inspiration because that's what was around.
What was around, it was a time before the internet. So
Yeah.
you got these occasional VHS cassettes. And I always tell a story of being in India I was 10 when I left home, Malaysia, to go and train in Indian classical dance full time with a guru in India. And I continued my ballet training. And I used to go every Tuesday to the British Council in Madras to watch ballet videos.
Wow.
And there was one video that was Baryshnikov at Wolf Trap. I always remember this. And so I was so curious to watch Baryshnikov because I'd read so much about him in these books.
Yeah.
And it was like 4 pieces. And the last piece, he was dancing Dong Q. And it starts off, and I start watching him. And then slowly my eyes just moved away from him. And I just only watched the ballerina who was Kelsey Kirkland. And I still will never forget. I mean, it is with the podcast, I guess followers can't see it, but I still remember the end of the coda and she did this supported pirouette. And then just for 1 microsecond, when she extended her leg, she just extended her toes about an inch longer and she just looked at it.
Wow.
And then she went down.
Yeah.
And I kept rewinding and rewinding. So so women were really my idols really throughout, and still are actually. Yeah.
And when you were growing up as well, how often were you dancing?
Every day.
And when did you take it seriously, or knew it's what you wanted to
Immediately.
do? Immediately.
Immediately.
And so when you were training at that young age, did you know where you wanted to train professionally or where it might take you?
I think Akram and I talk about this a lot. I think what was actually so beautiful about our time was that there was no way you would have any perception of where it would lead to.
Yeah.
Which meant you kind of still invested in a particular rigor in your training with no expectations of an outcome. You just did it because you loved it.
Yeah.
I think that's lost slightly today.
Yeah. Especially with the modern generation and the Instagram and the instant gratification.
Oh,
or
so
something.
much.
Yeah.
So much. So I sometimes I have to say, when I'm in the studio and I'm coaching a dancer like Arena, and I've got someone like Loipa next to me, working with me.
Yeah.
Or, recently I've been coaching Olga Smirnova for something.
Whoa.
And I do have these moments where I go, God, how the hell did this kid from Malaysia end up here?
Well, we're going to talk about that, so don't worry. We'll get onto that. But yeah, I mean, and then, so when did you start performing then?
I started, I started performing with groups quite young.
Because kids in this country are performing in festivals
Yeah,
and competitions and things all the time.
The ballet school shows twice a year.
So were you performing when you were
I was
younger?
performing actually quite a lot, actually.
Yeah.
As a kind of child, performer. But then I kind of professionally started performing in Bharatanatyam, which is the Indian classical dance style that I do.
Yeah.
You have a kind of a graduation, if you like.
Yeah.
And that graduation is the first time you actually perform. I guess you have it in music, actually. A concert recital.
Yeah, like your final recital or something when you graduate. Yeah.
And that's about a 3-hour solo.
Yeah.
So
And at what age was that?
I did mine when I was 16.
Right. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah, I did mine when I was 16, and my career really was so random. It kind of just suddenly took off. I got invited to do like an afternoon slot in quite a big festival and was seen, and then was invited to open that whole festival in India at the age of 17, and the whole thing just went, flipped.
Yeah.
Immediately.
Yeah.
But again, I think I was really lucky because it was a time, I feel, when audiences would follow someone. So I was not the best dancer, I don't think, but there was something that audiences committed to in terms of following my journey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when I go and dance in India now, I still have people who have watched me since I was 16.
And
Wow.
that's pre-social media as well. So you knew you had a following from your performances.
Yeah. It's quite special, actually.
Yeah.
Like an engaged audience, not just engaged with the screen and on the phone. It's like an audience that actually actively engaged to come and watch you perform.
And actively engaged in the choices that you make as an artist through that process, which means they're engaged in your failures as well.
Yes.
Which is beautiful.
But then also people, especially of that generation, because maybe I sound slightly older now, that's not quite the modern generation, but people are more, or seem to be more accepting of failures from the previous generations, whereas now everything has to be filtered and perfect, and there's no room for imperfections sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things, when I'm coaching so much, that I find that about Akram and I are consistently kind of quite pedantic about, actually, is the danger when it becomes about impressing.
Yeah.
It just becomes an impressive spectacle. And when that happens, A, it's a short-term thing. B, it's no longer experiential, artistically. And what's, I think, interesting for me as a performer, and the fact that I'm still performing now in my late 40s.
Let's say mid-40s.
I mean, 48, I think I have to accept is like late 40s now. But, everything that I was good at, when I was a young dancer, I had very high extensions, which was unusual at that time for a man. I danced on point a lot. Everything about me that I had harnessed in terms of this androgynous construct that I was as a 20, 30-year-old dancer were the first things that left me. The first things when I turned 40. But what was so beautiful was that I came from a dance education, both balletically and in Indian classical dance, where the minute I lost all those things that I had got used to impressing audiences with, I was able to immediately start finding other things that were so much more deeper. And that I would not have been able to find as a 20-year-old.
With that understanding and how you make that connection, and how if you've not quite got the facility that you had 20 years ago, what you do to still make that connection, it goes deeper. It's not just it's physical. It's not just skin deep anymore.
Exactly.
Like that,
And I just always talk about I think because I sit in this crossroads, right, having lived in the West for over 30 years, but still working a lot in India and Asia, where in this part of the world, I joke sometimes when I do class with ENB dancers, and I am the oldest person in class there, and then when I go to India, and then it's this strange space where they're younger dancers, but there are so many masters who are still much older than me, and who just look at me as a kid still.
Are you the twink in the room?
Not a twink, not a twink, but not yet the daddy, I would say. But I had a teacher who was so beautiful, who's still performing. He's in his 80s in India.
Wow.
And I went up to him at one point, and he said, how are you doing? And I said, oh, sir, I can't do this anymore. And blah, blah.
Is that your aspiration then, to be dancing at 80? Or
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
Because what this teacher said to me, which was so beautiful, he said, don't think of what you can't do anymore. Think of the things you can do now you couldn't do then.
Yeah.
Wow.
And there are so many things that I, as an someone who loves an artistic experience, I know that that it is that particular experience that will take me, that will allow me to facilitate those kinds of things, you know? So I feel like everything is still a dress rehearsal
Yeah.
for something hopefully that is more sublime. Yeah.
So did you just say you came to this country when you were 18 then, 30 years ago?
I came to this country in 1994 when Take That was still a band.
Were you as devastated as
you know,
I was when they split?
I was totally devastated.
Hang on, which
I
was the
was
biggest devastation? Was it Spice Girls or Take That?
Take That for sure.
I was in the closet, so I couldn't show I was really upset.
But I don't know.
So young.
I don't know. Do you guys are musicians? Do you get not triggered, but beautifully triggered by music songs? Because I get very, very triggered by songs that connect me to nostalgia. Right.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
for me, like, you know, Four Weddings and a Funeral,
Yeah.
the film, and that Wet, Wet, Wet single is so connected to this young 18-year-old that arrived in London.
That's the thing with music, though, isn't it? It stays
Yeah.
with you. There's a song for a
Oh.
specific time or something. There's a song, you don't remember this, Akiko, from when we were first dating back in 2016, I think.
I
it
have
was.
no idea.
No, you know, and we were sitting in this favourite bar in a little Japanese village where Akiko's mum
yes,
lives.
I
And it's
remember.
Eric Clapton, Tears in Heaven. And
Right.
we'd only been dating a few months. And I got over to Japan and we
Yeah.
were sitting there having a drink and this song hit. I was like, it was just a song of that time. And then I started playing it in ballet class. And
Yeah.
then when we'd had Hazel,
Yeah.
a couple of years ago, I played it in ballet class a few days after Hazel was born. And the teacher just said to me, "Sir, that song means even more now, doesn't it?" I was like, yeah, it does. But it's
But it's a bit sad song though.
well, I know it is. It's not. Let's take away the lyrics and just go for the melody. But like Erek Mukhamadoff,
Yeah.
his one was "She" from Notting Hill.
Right.
Elvis Costello was "She,"
Right.
and he had. If you played that for him, and it was from Notting Hill, from his times when he was in London and what he was going through at that time. It's funny. how
It's so
stuff
interesting
touches.
because when I teach class, you know, because I'm always kind of quite clear about what I have to offer as a teacher. You know, I always joke when I go and sometimes it surprises me because I teach big companies now, right? But I'd never really had a career in classical ballet, actually, right? So I'm always in my head, okay, like what is it that I offer that is different from someone who has had a really prestigious balletic career?
Yeah.
And really, I think what I offer is a kind of, I share a lot of techniques or processes into a particular kind of technique of artistic interpretation. So what my point is that, for example, sometimes I'll say to Matt, "Oh, can we have West Side Story for Adagio," right? And I always talk about with the dancers the ability, even in class, if it's a tune that has a point of memory to you, how are you able to, in that moment, get into that space as you're doing that Adagio and allow those memories to filter through,
Yeah.
you know, because then it becomes personal.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then that's what starts to make performance, isn't it?
That's
That's where it
yeah.
grows from.
Totally. And it's not something that's it really is a technique, because to be able to harness that ability to be so personal but yet objective,
Yeah.
that's a technique. You know, and therefore it has to be done in class every day.
Because class is where you practice it.
Yeah.
It's like physical technique. It's like, you know, getting everything right.
But when you teach, you really make the dancers think,
I think it's so important.
and not just you take them away of sort of doing just the classical technique and how difficult it might be.
But
and-
Matt, I think that something happened, which I remember in the kind of late 90s, which I really resist, which is two things, which I think as the arts became, from an infrastructure perspective, more sophisticated, if you like, the concept of dance as a job,
Yeah.
you know, became more prominent. And I think right from education now, when I coach, what I'm fighting with is also that dancers have been taught right from school to think of the possibility of this calling that they've had become a job, which means there's very clear boundaries, right? And I think I come from a generation where there's a huge conviction in serving a calling and not doing a job.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's totally different, totally different perspective, right? So the idea of dancers not just doing warm up, which is something that used to develop in the 90s.
Yeah.
You know, classes your warm up. Like
Before that, it was just sitting on the radiator, wasn't it?
having a fag.
Having a fag out the window and sitting on the radiator. Actually, it wasn't even out the window in the 80s, was it? Because you could freely smoke in the studio.
You could smoke in the studio. I remember it when you could smoke in the studio. You could smoke on flights.
Oh,
Do you know,
yeah.
when I
remember.
used to be a very professional cigarette smoker, I really miss the days. I don't smoke anymore.
Do you remember the old ENB company, the J Muse?
J Muse.
And one of the teachers told me that, where the bar is, there was this little like round thing that attached to the wall, the bar to the wall.
Oh,
that
for the
was
fag
ashtrays.
That was ashtrays.
Amazing.
So the dancer would just smoke and then just put it there and then continue the bar.
There is a very old documentary of Makarova, actually. It's an amazing documentary, and it starts with the camera by her feet. And it pans its way up, and she's doing bar, and it starts like with her point shoes, she's going plie, and then it goes up, and then you come, and she's doing the whole bar once. Amazing.
So, Maven, can we
That
talk?
was so serious.
That was very serious. you were like news and television. So, Nathan.
Oh God! Yeah. Okay, let's keep it light. Let's talk about your relationship with Akram,
Okay.
because as long as I've known you, my association is you are Akram's associate.
Yeah. Oh,
So how did you?
so Akram and I met.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the beginning of that.
We were brought together in 1997 by one. I think it was Dance Exchange in Birmingham. Sampath and Alistair Spalding, who now is the director of Sadler's Wells, but used to be the director of the South Bank. And it was a time when they used to bring a lot of artists together and leave you in a room and see what happens.
Right.
Basically. And, we both, I think, ticked a lot of boxes. We were both bilingual in our dance training. I was trained in Bharatanatyam and classical ballet. Akram was at that time still, I think, at Northern Contemporary, and he was a Kathak dancer as well. And we were both male dancers. So we ticked every box possible, right?
Yeah.
Before box ticking was a thing.
Before box ticking was a thing. But I think my memory of Akram so clearly was this kind of obsessive madness that I connected to. I remember so clearly that every moment that there was a break, he would be in the corner of the room and he would just spend his gaze just focusing on his hands and how his wrists would move, but like for hours, and it's real privilege having known Akram before he was Akram Khan.
Yeah.
Because in so many ways now, he's exactly the same person. Nothing has shifted. It's not because people could say, he's in a space of such success and privilege to be able to do certain things. Actually, Akram, even when he was poor, would have insisted on certain
The same
things.
thing. Yeah.
Exactly the same thing. So that's how we started. And we made a duet together. We danced together in 99. And that was quite successful, I think. And then we kind of we stayed in touch, but we went our separate ways. And he became this huge, icon really in the dance world.
Yeah.
I had a different trajectory, we both had a complex one, but we can talk about mine later.
Yeah.
And then in about 2012, he called me one day and he said, can you come in and just, initially it was just to guest teach the company because he was doing a piece called Bahok, which was with his dancers and some dancers from, I think it was the National Ballet of China, I think it was. So it was to teach ballet class just as a guest artist. And then I started coming in as a guest coach more regularly. I started touring with them. And then really Giselle happened and he brought me in to be with him for the creation. And being in the creation of Giselle was probably one of the most life-changing experiences that I've ever had. Because that combination of ENB had basically stopped for 3 months. Anything else. So the whole company was only doing Giselle. And in J Muse, in the upstairs studio. And when you just started to, I will never forget the first day that we had a draft of some choreography of the second act Padada, and Vince had sent a draft of the music, and they Alina and James just showed the first draft of it, and the whole company just went like, pin drop silence.
Yeah.
And I remember I went, something's happened. Like you really
that was it.
Something has happened. And then just seeing this kind of like his creativity kind of just like flow like that. And the combination of him and Alina, and it was just amazing.
Yeah.
So when I finished Giselle, I said, I just need to be with you all the time.
That was it.
Basically. And since then, I've been with him full time, really. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Going back to Giselle a sec, what you say, magic was being made. What can you talk us through the process of how Akram creates movement?
It's a long process.
Right,
we're talking about from concept to actually, it's always about 2 to 3 years of talking, of conceptualizing.
Yeah.
The creative team coming in, and we had the amazing designer Tim Yip who designed Crouching Tiger and Hidden Dragon. He came in for Giselle. He had worked with us before, and there's a lot of toing and froing before we actually get to the studio.
Yeah,
and then when we get to the studio, Akram works a lot in phases. So it's like a month here and then 6 months off, come back a month, and he gives us time to really
process
and but then the overall, I would say, studio time is usually about 4 months, 4 to 5 months for full length work, full time.
Yeah.
Full time. What was interesting with Giselle, I think Akram has talked about this before, was that the actual composer who was going to compose it backed out a month before the premiere.
Oh, I didn't know.
Oh,
that.
I know this because Gavin finished it.
Yeah, well, Vince was brought in and Gavin came to orchestrate it.
Yeah,
and Akram was literally doing the day 10 to 6, and then he was going and working with the composer through the night and coming back.
Can you talk about that, the whys and sort of the impact?
The impact was interesting. What I love with Akram is that he has this amazing capacity, basically, never to demonstrate panic. Right? So
he sounds like the opposite of me.
He's incredibly very graceful. He's just very graceful.
Yeah.
So he kind of really held everyone together. And also, I guess we didn't really share the fact that the composer had backed out, really, because we didn't want to cause that panic. And so when he invited Vince, who had only done one other production with us, and at that point was, I guess, relatively not so well known. It was a huge gamble, I have to say, even for ENB to
go with it.
But there was so much trust there. And Gavin was instrumental, absolutely, because Vince didn't score. So Gavin had to step in that context. And it was like day by, with Akram it's so full on. So it's like day by day we just kept getting a sketch. It reminded me what I would assume a Diaghilev process would be like.
Yeah.
Actually.
Yeah,
that kind of ballet rules, kind of like, like all that.
But the thing is as well, like the night of the premiere is set.
Yeah.
And so it has, there's a point where it has to be made.
It has to be made. And not just that, with Akram's work, there are like about 5 drafts of it being made before it gets the final take, right?
Yeah.
So it actually has to be made like before in order to go through those 5 drafts. Because he's, I think what people sometimes don't realize is that Akram is, both of us, we are trained in music also, right? Indian classical music. So we both have a very, very acute sense of music, which means we have very clear directions, and we have very clear kind of like, we want this as well. And with Akram, I think his process is, there's one element in terms of understanding what the draft is. There's a whole, as you know, element when you hear it with an orchestra suddenly for the first time. And then there's a whole other element for him where you then have it with an audience, which then also changes things again, which is why previews are super important, as you know. So it's a massive process. Yeah.
And you've been with him full time now.
I just, I think I don't know, Akiko, maybe you would understand this, because I do think sometimes there's certain things that the West will always struggle to understand. Certain feelings.
Yes.
And I do think like the relationship I have with Akram, which, I would genuinely say for me, the words I would describe is like
And you don't need to discuss about it.
Yeah, and it's so devoted. So it's a complex relationship because I don't think it's an understandable relationship. It's so based on, I've often said this, it's like I have no shame or embarrassment to say that I'm absolutely in love with the man and the art, and both of them sit together. Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's brilliant. So, your role today within his company as the associate, you go around the world and stage those.
I'm the
those
bad
work.
cop, basically. I'm like the
I thought that
inspector
in the
that
open
goes
classes,
around.
when you've been there, I was like, he walks in, here comes the bad cop.
Because like the book stops with you.
I mean,
essentially at the when the other companies do his work.
Yeah, I mean, I think I just know him so well, and also I think the beauty of his work is, for example, we do Giselle in 2016. When it's done now, the necessity for the work to still sit in a space that is relevant to who he is now and not in 2016.
Yeah, and
is
have
crucial.
developed in 2014, 2015,
Absolutely.
2016, whenever.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
which means that I think my role more than anything is to always ensure that when I go and check on the work, that I'm able to bring a part of who he is today into the, however beautifully it's been looked after by whichever team, that I need to share where he is today with you.
And that's probably something that only you or he can do.
Yeah.
Because the staff at any company that's staging the work, you have that detail and the extra layer.
There's that, but also, Matt, I think, one of the things, the beauty of Akram's work actually is that it is work really that people genuinely experience and get very emotional about, right? Which means that it's to be able to articulate it, or as I say as an artist, facilitate it in a way that is experiential. It's very hard to do within a structure of a company where, okay, you've got 2 hours rehearsal now to do this.
That's it. Yeah.
Right? Because you have to live it. It's very method.
Yeah.
It's actually very method.
Yeah.
So for us to be able to come to companies which if by necessity have to have structures that are scheduled, we have to always find a way and a conviction to be able to bring those structures into our way of working.
That must be quite difficult sometimes, because I mean, taking it from a musician's perspective, if you've got you're booked for 3 hours, but you're entitled to a 15-minute period in that where you are paid usually around the middle, and it's very structured, isn't it? And companies are the same. And when I've been in companies, so trying to sort of break that down slightly, because they're not used to saying that. Okay, right, well, we'll run over 15 minutes, but come 20 minutes later.
But to be fair, we don't do that. I think the beauty is that we've learned how to be super precise in terms of time management.
Right.
But what is expected within that is probably more demanding than what dancers may be used to. Yeah. Because it's exhausting. The kind of work we do, I think, if I can imagine, I don't know, I've never been a musician like this, but I can imagine, I don't know, playing Stravinsky or something. It's the same kind of process. The only way you're able to achieve what the work demands or to give that experience is genuinely by going to at such a space that exhaustion lands itself. So you have to trust exhaustion.
And you're absolutely screwed at the end of it,
Absolutely. And that's when it sits, right? Or lands, rather. So to convince, and the thing is, it's easy to convince. I have the beautiful job, I always say, of coaching the principals. So it's to convince an Erina Takahashi or James Streeter is absolutely simple because they are there with me. It's much tougher for Nikki Henschel, who deals with really the full company. Because I can get all the principals there, but getting, another 50 dancers who all have their own reasons why they're dancing, right? To believe in that, that's tough. I really put my hands down towards like Nikki Henschel and artists like that.
That's a tough gig.
That's tough.
Obviously Nikki works a lot with you, doesn't she, on those things as well?
Yeah.
Especially Giselle.
Yeah.
And what's that like coaching those principal dancers you just named?
Just amazing.
Because James and Arena are very special.
Well,
people.
also I think what people don't realize is actually because with Akram's work, we work so much in contemporary dance with projects, right? So usually you tend to have different group of dancers based on what the project is.
Yeah, it's project based. It's not company based, isn't it? Yeah.
So actually, the beauty now today, since we did Dust all those years ago, is that dancers like Arena and James actually are the ones who have danced Akram's works consistently the longest.
Yeah.
So when we go into a process, it's so. I mean, I remember coaching Arena and Fabian in a duet in Creature, and because they trust so much the process now. They were going so method. I mean, they were going. Arena and Fabian were going as deep as there's a particular Padada that's quite aggressive, I would say, in the second act. And she was going like, okay, what are you drinking? What kind of alcohol are you drinking? What kind of cigarette? Because that would determine...
That's how deep she was.
Yeah, that would
process.
determine how my body is going to react to you, or how I smell you. Just incredible. So it becomes a different kind of collaboration.
You're not introducing them to the process, are you? Because they've been through it. So you can sort of get there quicker where you need them to be, essentially.
Well, more importantly, I'm not having to convince them about the process, I would say. And you land in more unexpected places, which is super exciting. It's just it's beautiful. It's a tremendous privilege coaching, and also I have to say, being with Akram has given me that real blessing of coaching dance. I've coached Alina Kojakaro, right? Which is just I did a whole rehearsal with her. I still remember in the downstairs studio of J Muse, where she spent an hour, which is where I would go as a dancer. An hour, we were both exploring about in the second act how her fingers would reach out to touch Elbrecht.
Just an hour for the fingers.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
Just because as Giselle in the second act, where would you be? You're not human, but you're not completely. So where would the bones be, and how would the muscles then affect, and how would air affect the? That's the level of depth that those kinds of artists bring. Yeah,
it's amazing.
It is amazing. It is totally. It's awe inspiring, actually. Yeah, it's awe inspiring.
Can I ask you, Mavin, what influence music has had on your dancing career?
The most
from when you started as the young 5-year-old.
Yeah.
Sorry, for the podcast listeners, apart from started, not started. Was it in you at the start? Because I know, like when I've played for classes that you've been part of as a dancer recently, your interpretation of music and how you use music is,
and
it goes to a level. Sorry, Matt, I've taken over hosting.
No, it's fine, because I was going to get onto that, because the way you use music when you teach as well, obviously that comes from when you were dancing as well.
Yeah. I mean, music for me is everything.
Yeah.
So like you seem to be inspired when I play for you by music.
I am. I mean, for me, it is everything. I think, firstly, I would say that I come from a generation of Indian dancers, which I don't think happens so much now, where we were all not just taught music. Every dance composition that you learned, before you were allowed to learn it choreographically, you had to learn it musically.
Oh gosh, so you've got that real innate understanding.
Wow.
And so, I mean, like, you have to be able to sing it, like proper, right? And so, first and foremost, you got rid of an inhibition of whether you had a good voice or, like, I have a very average voice, but I know my music.
Yes.
You see?
I can vouch for that.
And I think I also most of us had, like, my guru in India was a dance teacher, but he was also what we call a grade A vocalist, classical vocalist for radio.
Right.
So he also had a career as a singer.
Wow.
Right. So I grew up with live music every day, and not just live music, but high quality of live music, And he sang for me live right until he passed away. So that's over 25 years he sang live for me. And then, we also came from a time where I remember when I studied at Cunningham School, and Cunningham is so interesting because people always just associate Cunningham with postmodernist kind of, abstract work, right? Or dancing in silence or soundscapes. But his class work was so music-based. I mean, he really was like, which annoys me sometimes because people interpret his values, I think, so wrongly. Like actually to be able to work at that level of dancing in silence or against music, his whole thing was you have to know music so well.
To be able to dance against music, or you've got to have.
There is a musicality.
You can't dance against something that you don't understand.
Absolutely. There's a musicality in going off.
Yeah.
If it makes sense. And then, when I was growing up in London, of course, I was totally spoiled by, I remember John Sweeney as a young pianist.
Oh, he's amazing.
And there was a beautiful pianist called David Walters, I remember. And
David Walters from Central.
Philip Feeney and all these people,
Yes.
right? And they were not just pianists, but they were like, they would give it their
Absolute
all.
titans.
Yeah.
And I remember as a student, when I used to do class and John used to play, I would stay back after my class and I would stand by the door with this little square window and I would just watch, because I've always been I still am, even with the musicians who play for me for Indian music. I was so fascinated by the muscularity of how he would facilitate his limbs as he played. I said this to him recently and he said, never look at my fingers. But for me, I almost always wanted to be able to be equal in that amount of commitment physically. I remember with one of my singers in India, I said to him, this particular raga that you're singing, I want to know exactly what you do with your throat to hit the life of those notes.
Yeah.
So I'm very fascinated by first and foremost, by what the musicians actually do, because I have tremendous amount of respect for it. And I feel that for me is the heart of the whole thing.
Yeah.
It frustrates me so much at how unmusical just generally things are today.
Now I want to play for your class.
I think you neither of you have you?
No, I haven't played for Maven yet.
Oh,
Hopefully we'll get the chance to.
I hope you will.
It's quite rare nowadays to have a ballet teacher or dancer who would kind of engage with the musician this much.
And the thing is,
It's totally a collaboration.
And what's so special about Maven is your class is completely unplanned until the moment you get in.
Yeah,
you said if you pre-plan
plan
something, it's going to go to isn't it?
You know how I started teaching ballet class?
Well, yeah, I was wanted to ask, so go on. Because I'm interested.
So I started going. There was a time that London, right, open classes was quite amazing, I have to say, the kind of teachers that used to teach in the open.
Yeah.
And
actually some of the celeb dancers that used to come to open classes.
Because I think something has changed in the culture, because all the dancers who used to work in the West End usually would come for class, not gym, class before they go to work. So the classes were packed and then you get like Darcy Bustle and people like this coming for class, right?
Yeah.
And there was a time at DanceWorks, literally the whole week was a combination of my main teachers was Marion Sinclair, Michael Beer, Nancy Kilgore, who was just the most amazing teacher, Ayumi Hikasa. It was all these, right?
And celebrity A-list of
and
world.
one thing I want to share, because I will always be so touched by this. So when I was a young dancer, I would get a gig at South Bank for a week or something like this. That's quite high profile. You'd be on timeout and stuff like that. And then nothing for like 5 months. And then you'd get one massive gig in, Tokyo or something, and then nothing. And it was such an ironic space to be, because you get these big gigs, right? And then it's almost like people also thought, because you're getting big gigs, that you were not interested in.
You're not interested in the smaller stuff, or the bread and butter.
So I was really, really poor for a long time, right? And there was a point where at DanceWorks, what all the teachers did together for me, Marion Sinclair, Nancy Gill, all of them, they all collectively agreed that they would never charge me for class.
Wow.
So that I could come and do class, right?
Wow.
So they were like really my godmothers, all of them. And they kept me in training every time I was between
and Raymond, your fairy godmother.
Fairy godmother.
Yeah.
Hi, Raymond.
Hi, Raymond.
But one day we were there, and this is before mobile phones at DanceWorks. And it was quite a packed class. And the receptionist came and said that Marion Sinclair had gone to a payphone somewhere and her car had broken down. And she said, tell Maven to teach the class. And I was 19. And, like teaching professional class, the 3:00 class with all
Wow.
these
Yeah.
bitches.
With Bonnie Langford, Wayne
like
Sleep.
really like there's this thing and this 19-year-old kid. But it was like the best learning. And really from there, I started teaching a lot by covering classes
Yeah.
first, but professional classes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which made me very early on realize that I think it's very different teaching for a school and teaching for any professional context, whether
Yes.
it's open class or company class, because the unpredictability of what it can be in open class, who you get in the class, to in a company situation, to what they've done the night before and
Yeah.
therefore what their mood is.
Mm.
And so I learned very quickly that I just had to go immediately with what do I have in front of me today?
Yeah.
Like a chef.
Really,
Yeah.
really, what do I have in front of me today? And
So
also,
that's how you learned to tailor your class
yeah,
and to go on the fly because you didn't know who you were going to get
Absolutely.
in that class.
because I felt more pressure when I was setting class, and then like no one was getting it or no one was in that mood, and then I was
Yeah.
going like, oh shit, like it's not
What do
working.
I do? Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've got
Yeah.
to just walk in and read the room,
Read
and
the room.
then tailor it with your knowledge and experience.
Absolutely. I mean, I believe so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is perhaps maybe why I've not really taught in a school situation. I don't think I would be a good teacher for students. To
That's
be
it. I
honest.
mean, teaching, like you just said, teaching in schools and teaching in companies or teaching in profession, it's a completely different ball game. It's
totally.
It's and just
Totally.
because you can teach well in a school, it doesn't mean that you would be a good rehearsal director or a good
Oh, totally.
company class teacher.
Totally. It's such different skills.
Yeah, the aims and the values of what you have to give are
Absolutely.
totally different, and also
Absolutely.
the time values. Like if you run over by 30 minutes in a school, tough.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
you're over by 2 minutes,
No,
because you
no.
want because you want a manege
Yeah.
at the end of class, nah.
But I think what I love is, like, for example, if Matt plays for me, which I've had the joy many times for a lot of companies where he's played for me, I think it's also very important to quite quickly be able to be sensitive to a particular aesthetic that pianist has.
Yeah,
And then you really start to almost work together in harnessing and filling up a combination of who I am and who you are, you know, because
I play very differently from you than how I do for other teachers.
yeah.
And it's
the
almost
difference, do you think?
it's almost limitless. You're so open to anything that the pianist will play,
Yeah.
and then you will use it.
Yeah,
Oh,
You
wow.
know,
yeah,
in your corrections or what
Yeah.
you offer.
yeah.
You then bring the music with you, whatever it is.
Because
it
you
could
know
just be
what?
the cutest little ditty. It could be a little Disney tune or something.
Yeah.
And then you then bring it into your work.
Because I think what for me, I'm very prescriptive actually, is tempo. I'm
Right.
Yeah.
obsessed with the tempo being right for what
Yeah.
the exercise
Yeah.
is. And then about holding the tempo. That's my Indian music
Yeah,
training,
yeah.
the tempo hold.
Yeah.
Because once I have that, then the beauty and the brilliance of the pianist who's able to fill that or color that scape, you know, with that precision of that tempo is everything for me.
But you put a lot of rhythm in your voice. You really use your voice.
You know,
And,
Michael
and
Beer.
all the sort of subdivides of the beats that we would recognize in
Yeah.
music,
Yeah.
you put them into your voice. And then, as we've said on other episodes, that informs what we play.
Yeah, sure.
And then we build on that.
Yeah.
You give us more. And it
Yeah.
just, it builds.
Well, it's a combination. Obviously, in Indian music, I'm very attuned to mathematics and rhythms, and you know, vocal percussion is what I majored in mostly. Then in Cunningham, you know, we used to have exercises. I mean, I remember doing a Tondu exercise with him, which was five fives, and another one which was 11 and a half.
11
I'm
and a
not
half.
joking. Yeah, which was 5, 1, 5, 5, 1.
One.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And Michael Beer, actually, who used to teach me a lot, never ever, I think Michael Ho does this as well, never ever counted. So that every time he was setting a exercise, Tondu, it would be he never went and one and two
Yeah.
and ever.
Oh, wow.
So everything was. So I think my training was. I was fortunate. I had these people who.
And it was melodically led.
Melodically
but it didn't
led.
have to. But when the pianist played, it didn't have to be that tune that they played. It just that was
Yeah.
what was in their head at the time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, that was the go-to tune for that
Absolutely.
particular
Yeah.
choreography for the Tondu or whatever.
Yeah. And
That's possibly why you really connect with John, because he spoke on the podcast about, briefly how he improvises, and he doesn't work sort of harmonically in sort of chord format. He works in sort of melody and counterpoint, as you know.
Yes.
And it's melody led.
It is very melody led.
You know what I mean?
It is very melody led.
Whereas we might place chords in bars, John doesn't. He does sometimes.
But he doesn't always do what you expect.
Yeah.
But also, I think for me, what I find frustrating again sometimes with that lack of understanding.
Like
therapy.
We've said this podcast is therapy because it's cheaper to sit around the table with a Diet Coke or a Asahi beer than it is to pay for therapy.
But I find honestly, I just love the life that exists. For me, like if there's a Polonaise there is a whole like life that sits in that, or a waltz, or if it's just a 4/4 that is sitting. I always say to the dancers, you have to feel the life of that time cycle.
Yeah, because it's still living between the beats.
Absolutely.
Nothing's dead between 1, 2, 3, 4. It doesn't stop.
Absolutely.
And in the same way, it doesn't
life,
stop. But it doesn't stop physically, does it? In the same way, it doesn't stop musically. It just it has to continue.
And that, what you're saying now, when I coach, I talk about this a lot. What is available in the invisible that sits between? That's where you're an artist.
Yes. Because I remember being a really young kid at music boarding school, and we were learning music theory. And they said, they're called rests, but they are not rests. Because that is when you work the hardest.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
There is no such thing as a rest when you're performing or playing. Because that's when you're working the hardest. Is when you're appearing calm on the surface and you're counting like stink underneath.
Even like when you tacit and stuff.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Coming in back in the right place and when you do
you're not just sitting there Instagramming.
Exactly.
No.
Well. But when you do things with different rhythms, as you say, in those silences, it's part of it.
But how do you feel? Because you've played for me. What's interesting with you, Matt, is you've played for me. I
remember when I first played for you, and it was Giselle Times 2016
at ENB.
At J Muse, and they said, "Oh, Maiden's really contemporary," and I always feel like a bit of a fraud when I have to play contemporary.
Sure,
and I just sort of gave you as much vibe as possible. But actually playing for you now, it's actually really classical.
It is really classical.
But let's say it's more free.
Yeah. But what is interesting?
But it's classical based.
Because you've played for me in a context where it's classical ballet dancers, and also you've played at Romba and stuff. So do you find there's a difference?
With the dancers?
Yeah, or how the class kind of unfolds based on those two quite opposite kinds of dancers. I don't think so, right?
No, I don't.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
No. Your class is very unique to you.
Yeah. Or to us.
So lovely.
No, but it's true.
At the end, you always invite the dancers to really appreciate the music. At the very end, always.
Yeah, I do that.
And it's just the most beautiful moment at the end of class. Because they'll do a cool down and you talk over the cool down. I just put the soft pedal down because it's sort of bring it all to a close. And it's really lovely.
I just find that so important, like I do this ritual after the class. I insist on it. Even you finish Grand Allegro, Coda Fuertes, whatever. I want that 1 minute where you just do one Grand Plie and you just close your eyes, because I feel so much that it is so easy for us to lose why we are dancing and what a privilege it is to dance. It's such a privilege.
And you even like thank the space. Which to have a huge space in London, unless you're at a big company, is unheard of.
It's not common.
Yeah, exactly.
Can I tell you a story about the space? So when I was 21 or 22, the Opera House had its renovation, right? From the old Opera House, and the new one was... And I think I was the first season of artists that was out of the Royal Ballet who were going to perform in the Opera House at the Claw Studio. That was that first season of artists. And so it was quite a big deal. I was very young and I had this piece that I did. And anyway, on the dress rehearsal, there was it was like a press rehearsal. And we had a curtain call, right? And I've always hated curtain calls because I feel really awkward.
Yeah.
Right? And it's not... I love classical curtain calls because you can kind of almost have a stylization of it, right? But when you just come and bow, I find it quite awkward.
Yeah, the classical ones are completely choreographed, isn't it?
It's totally choreographed.
Yeah, it's part of the theatre.
So I did this very awkward kind of curtain call, and then I went backstage, and my coach, Marion Sinclair at that time, she came up to me and she said, "What the hell was that curtain call?" And so I said, "Oh, Mitch, I just really hated it." And she gave me one across my face. And then she said, "Do you think it's about you?" And I went, "What do you mean?" And she said, when you do your curtain call, you go there, and you take that moment to just thank the space and everyone who has danced on that stage before you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's not about you. And I've kept that with me my whole life because that was such a learning experience, actually, to completely subvert that idea of a curtain call and actually for the audience, that everything to be just to acknowledge the space, which I think is just so beautiful.
I think that's amazing.
That is
I think
so
that's
lovely.
That's a great piece of advice for anybody.
Can we
to just
arrange
think
for you
about.
both to play for Maven?
Oh,
I
think we
love
have
to
to.
play now. Like
My diary's
I already
relatively
love
free.
you.
you come out feeling, inches taller
Oh wow!
because it's like really validating, and I'm so grateful.
Oh, but you know what I find quite funny is like every time it happens a bit less now because I think people know me more. But initially when I used to go and teach company class, right, and I walk in and everything about me is not what they expected. I got tattoos, I got eyeliner.
Your tattoos are brilliant, by the way.
Thank you. And so I always imagine ballet companies, like always that whole look from the whole room.
Yeah, but
initially.
it takes minutes, and you've got the meeting out of the palm of your hand.
I've learned. I've had to learn how to understand that they need to trust you.
Yeah.
And
they do.
It's a responsibility in that sense.
They really do.
Yeah.
Oh my God! I think that's a good place to wrap up.
I think that was the best hour I've had all
keep
week.
talking.
That was absolutely amazing.
Well, thank you guys for having me.
Maven, thank you for coming over
Yeah.
Thank
to East
you.
London.
No, man. But can I say something? Honestly, the reason why I kept saying to Matt, when are you having me on? Is because it's so beautiful to hear artists actually speak.
Yeah.
I think, it's born from honest chat, this thing.
Absolutely. And right, because I really follow your podcast, right? So everything from, how do you play for Ronde Jom to, there is so much lived experience there. So I hope you get more and more followers. Absolutely.
I just hope people like it. People take something from it and be happy.
It's
And
generally positive. Well,
I'm
it
sure,
is.
well, everyone's going to take a hell of a lot from listening to this. I think so. I have.
But just like just have a guest like you is just so privileged for us.
No, it's my pleasure.
Yeah. So,
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.